Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped sweat from her face as she crawled deeper into the ancient cave on Kepler 442b. The planet was supposed to be empty. No intelligent life had ever lived here, according to all the surveys. But the metal readings coming from these caves told a different story. "Hand me the scanner, Marcus," she called to her assistant. The young man passed her the device, his hands shaking slightly. They had been exploring this cave system for 3 days, and each day brought stranger discoveries. Elena pointed the scanner at the wall in front of her. The metal detector screamed with activity. Something big was buried behind the rock. She grabbed her laser cutter and began working on the stone. "Dr. Vasquez, you should see this," called Dr. Chen from deeper in the cave. His voice echoed strangely in the darkness. Elena made her way toward the sound. What she found made her drop her tools. The cavern was huge, bigger than a football stadium, and it was filled with things that should not exist. Metal structures rose from the floor like twisted trees. Strange symbols covered every surface. But, most shocking of all, were the bones. They were human bones, or close to human. The skulls were larger, the limbs longer, but the basic shape was unmistakably similar to humans. Elena had seen enough ancient skeletons to know what she was looking at. "These bones are old," Dr. Chen whispered. "Really old. The scanner says they're about 500,000 years old." Elena felt her heart racing. That was impossible. Humans had only been traveling in space for 400 years. How could human-like bones be on an alien planet that was over 5,000 light years from Earth? She moved closer to examine the metal structures. The symbols on them were not random. They formed patterns, like writing. But it was unlike any human language she had ever seen. It was also unlike any alien language in the databases. "Get the translation computer," she ordered, "and call Captain Stone. He needs to see this." While they waited for the captain, Elena studied the bones more carefully. These beings had been tall, maybe 8 feet high. Their hands had 6 fingers instead of 5. But their faces looked almost human. Captain Marcus Stone arrived an hour later with 2 soldiers. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been in space for 30 years and thought he had seen everything. "What do you have for me, Doctor?" he asked. Elena showed him the bones and the metal structures. She explained about the age of everything they had found. The captain listened without speaking. "There's more," Elena said. She led him to a wall covered in symbols. "The computer has been working on translating these. It found matches in our databases." "Matches to what?" Stone asked. "Earth. Ancient Earth. Some of these symbols appear in cave paintings that are hundreds of thousands of years old. Paintings that we always thought were made by primitive humans." The captain stared at the wall. "You're saying these things were on Earth? 500,000 years ago?" "I'm saying these things might have made those paintings. Look at this." Elena showed him a section of the wall where the translation computer had made progress. The symbols told a story about a great journey, a story about leaving a world behind. "They left," Elena read from the computer screen. "The small ones were not ready. The harvest was poor. The project failed. Time to find new ground." Stone felt a chill run down his spine. "The small ones? What small ones?" Elena looked at him with frightened eyes. "I think they mean us. I think they mean humans. Over the next few days, they found more evidence. Pieces of technology buried in the rock. Genetic material that was partly human, partly something else, and more writing. The story became clearer as the computer translated more symbols. These beings, who Elena started calling the predecessors, had lived on Earth long ago. They had been advanced, powerful, and intelligent. But they had not been alone. According to the writings, there had been other creatures on Earth. Smaller, weaker creatures that the predecessors had used for experiments. These smaller creatures had been kept like animals. They had been bred, studied, and changed. "They're talking about early humans," Elena told Stone as they sat in the ship's meeting room. "We weren't alone on Earth. These predecessors lived there too. And we were their pets." Stone rubbed his tired eyes. "Keep going. The writings say that Earth became difficult to live on. The climate changed. Resources became scarce. So they decided to leave, but they didn't take the smaller creatures with them. They just left us behind. The room was quiet for a long time. Finally, Stone spoke. How do we know this is true? Maybe these are just stories. Elena pulled up images on the computer screen. Because we found genetic evidence, DNA samples from both the predecessors and from creatures that match early human genetics. The computer analyzed them. Captain, human. DNA has artificial markers in it. Markers that could only have been put there by advanced genetic engineering. What kind of markers? Control mechanisms, ways to influence behavior, health, even reproduction. Someone changed our ancestors, Stone. Someone designed us. Stone stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the alien stars looked the same as always, but now they felt different. Now they felt threatening. Where did they go? He asked. The writings mention a destination, a cluster of stars in the Orion Arm, about 3,000 light-years from Earth. Stone turned around. Are they still there? I don't know. But, Captain, there's something else. Something that worries me more. Elena brought up another section of translated text. This part talks about return, about coming back to check on their experiments when they become advanced enough to be useful again. Stone felt his blood turn cold. How advanced is advanced enough? Space travel, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, all the things humanity has developed in the last few centuries. The captain sat down heavily. They might be coming back, or they might already be watching us. Captain, if these beings are still alive, if their technology is as advanced as these ruins suggest, then humanity is in serious danger. Stone activated the ship's communication system. Get me, Admiral. Chen on Earth, priority 1. While they waited for the connection, Elena continued studying the translations. What she found next made her hands shake. Captain, she whispered, there's more. These beings didn't just leave Earth once. According to this, they've done this before, many times. They find a planet, develop the local life forms, use them for whatever they need, then abandon them and move on to the next world. How many worlds? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And Captain, some of the worlds they mention, we've been to them. We found ruins on them, ruins we thought were from unknown alien civilizations. Stone realized what she was saying. They weren't unknown aliens. They were other species that these predecessors had experimented on and abandoned. Elena nodded. Just like they abandoned us. The communication system crackled to life. Admiral Chen's voice came through clearly from Earth, 5,000 light-years away. Captain Stone, report. Stone looked at Elena, then at the alien symbols on the wall around them. Admiral, we've found something. Something that changes everything we know about human history. And, sir, I think we're all in very serious trouble. As Stone began to explain their discoveries, Elena stared at the ancient bones scattered around the cavern. These predecessors had been humanity's gods once. They had created, controlled, and then abandoned the human race. But now, after half a million years, their abandoned children had grown up. They had learned to travel the stars, to fight, to survive on their own. And if these ancient masters were still out there, still watching, still planning to return, they were going to discover that their former pets had become something they never expected. They had become dangerous. 3 months after the discovery on Kepler 442b, Earth was in chaos. Every government, every military leader, every scientist wanted to know the same thing. Were the predecessors still alive? And were they coming back? Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the largest laboratory ever built. The facility stretched for miles under the surface of Mars, hidden from any eyes that might be watching from space. Around her, hundreds of scientists worked day and night to understand predecessor technology. Show me what we found, Admiral Chen said as he walked into the lab. The old man looked tired. He had not slept well since receiving Captain Stone's report. Elena led him to a table covered with strange metal objects. These are pieces of predecessor equipment we've dug up from 12 different worlds. The good news is that their technology is not magic. We can understand it, and we're starting to copy it. The bad news? The bad news is that they're about 1,000 years ahead of us, maybe more. Their computers are faster, their weapons more powerful, their ships bigger and stronger than anything we can build. Admiral Chen picked up one of the metal pieces. It was warm to the touch and seemed to hum with hidden energy. What does this do? It's a communication device, but not just for talking. It can control biological functions in any creature that has predecessor genetic markers. The Admiral's face went pale. I mean it can control humans. Make us sleep, make us sick, even kill us, from anywhere in the galaxy. Chen set the device down carefully. How many humans have these genetic markers? All of us, Elena said quietly. Every single human who has ever been tested. The markers are built into our basic DNA. The predecessors made sure their control systems would work on all their experimental subjects. The Admiral walked to a window that showed the red surface of Mars. What else have we learned? Elena showed him to another table. This one held star charts and navigation data. We've been tracking their path, following the trail they left when they abandoned Earth. Captain Stone was right. They didn't just disappear. They moved to another part of the galaxy. Where? Here. Elena pointed to a section of the star chart. A cluster of systems about 3,000 light-years away. Long-range sensors show heavy industrial activity. Lots of ships, lots of energy signatures. Something big is happening there. Admiral Chen studied the charts. How big? Big enough to support billions of beings, maybe trillions. Admiral, if the predecessors are still alive, they haven't been sitting idle for the last 500,000 years. They've built an empire. Thus, Admiral turned away from the charts. Are they coming back to Earth? Elena hesitated. We think so. We've detected scout ships moving in this direction. Not openly, but they're there. And Admiral, we found evidence that they never really stopped watching us. She led him to a computer terminal. Remember all those UFO sightings throughout human history? The strange objects in the sky that governments could never explain? We think those were predecessor observation probes. They've been watching us all along, studying us, measuring our progress, waiting to see if we would develop into something useful. Admiral Chen felt anger building in his chest. Useful for what? Whatever they used us for before. Labor, experiments, entertainment. The writings we found suggest they see other species as tools, things to be used and discarded. The Admiral's hands formed fists. Not anymore, they don't. Elena looked surprised. Sir? Dr. Vasquez, I want you to focus all your research on two things. First, figure out how to remove these genetic controls from human DNA. Second, figure out how to turn their own weapons against them. Admiral, their technology is far more advanced than ours. Even if we remove the genetic controls, we can't match their firepower. Maybe not, Chen said, but we have something they lost a long time ago. What's that? The will to fight for our freedom. Across the galaxy, Captain Marcus Stone was leading humanity's first deep space reconnaissance mission into predecessor territory. His ship, the Defiance, was equipped with the best stealth technology human engineers could build. It was also armed with the first weapons created from captured predecessor technology. Stone stood on the bridge, looking at the alien, stars ahead. Somewhere out there were the beings who had created and abandoned his species. The beings who thought of humans as animals. Captain, his communications officer called, we're receiving a signal. Stone turned. From where? From one of the inner planets in this system. It's using old Earth radio frequencies. Stone felt his heart rate increase. Put it on speakers. The signal was weak and full of static, but the words were clear. And they were in English. Help us. Please. Anyone. They came back. Took most of us. Still some hiding. Please. Stone looked at his crew. Every face showed the same shock he felt. Communications. Can you trace that signal? Yes, sir. It's coming from a planet about 6 light hours away. The planet shows signs of human habitation. Stone's mind raced. Humans? This far from Earth? How is that possible? His science officer, Dr. Park, spoke up. Captain, what if they're not from Earth? What if they're another species that the predecessors experimented on? Another group of abandoned children? Stone realized she was right. Set course for that planet and prepare the landing teams. We might be about to meet our brothers. The planet they found was dying. Once it had been green and full of life. Now most of it was gray wasteland, Cities lay in ruins. Forests were burned to ash. But in hidden caves and underground shelters, they found survivors. The beings were humanoid, but different from Earth humans. They were taller, with longer arms and larger eyes, but their faces showed the same intelligence, the same emotions, the same fear that Stone had seen on human faces. "You are from the far star," one of the survivors said in broken English. "The home star. We learned your language from the old broadcasts." Stone knelt down next to the being. "What happened here?" The masters returned. "They said we had grown too independent, too dangerous. They took most of us away. The rest they tried to kill." "How long ago?" 10 of your years. We have been hiding ever since." Stone felt rage building inside him. These masters. Did they look like us? But taller? With 6 fingers? The survivor's eyes widened. "You know them?" "They were our masters too. But they abandoned us 500,000 years ago." "Then they will return to your world next," the being said. "They always come back. They never let their experiments become truly free." Stone stood up. He activated his communication device and contacted his ship. "Dr. Park, I want you to scan every planet in this system, look for more survivors, and prepare the medical bay. We're bringing refugees aboard." "How many refugees, Captain?" Stone looked around at the hundreds of faces staring at him from the shadows. Faces full of hope for the first time in years. All of them. As they worked to rescue the survivors, Stone learned more about the predecessors. They called themselves the Eternal Conclave. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for millions of years. They created species, used them, then destroyed or abandoned them when they became inconvenient. But something was changing. More and more of their experimental species were becoming advanced. Some were even starting to fight back. The predecessors were worried about losing control of their empire. "That's why they're returning to Earth now," Dr. Park said as they analyzed the data. "They're not just coming back to harvest us. They're coming back to make sure we don't become a threat." Stone smiled grimly. Too late for that. He sent an encrypted message back to Earth. "Admiral Chen, we've found them. The predecessors are real, they're powerful, and they're planning to return to Earth soon. But we've also found something else. We're not alone. There are other species out here who hate the predecessors as much as we do, and they're ready to fight." The message would take months to reach Earth. But Stone knew that when it arrived, Admiral Chen would understand what needed to be done. Humanity would not face the predecessors alone. The abandoned children of a dozen worlds were finally ready to confront their creators, and this time they would not be abandoned again. 6 months after Captain Stone's message reached Earth, humanity struck first. Admiral Chen stood in the command center deep under the Swiss Alps, watching dozens of screens that showed battles across 3 different star systems. Operation Prodigal was the largest military action in human history, and it was happening thousands of light years from Earth. "Assault Team Alpha has breached the first predecessor station," reported Commander Hayes. "They're meeting heavy resistance, but the new weapons are working." Chen nodded. "The new weapons were built using technology stolen from predecessor ruins, but modified with human engineering. They were crude compared to what the predecessors could build, but they worked." "What about Team Beta?" "They've taken the second station. Minimal casualties so far." Dr. Elena Vasquez stood next to Chen, monitoring the biological data from all the human soldiers involved in the attack. "Admiral, the genetic control signals are getting stronger. The predecessors are trying to activate the kill switches in our people. Are the treatments working?" "So far, yes. The gene therapy we developed is blocking most of their control signals, but it's not perfect. We're losing some people." Chen watched as red lights appeared on several of the screens, showing human soldiers who had collapsed when their genetic controls activated. Each red light represented a person who had died because their own DNA had been turned against them. "How many?" he asked quietly. 47 so far," Vasquez replied. Chen felt sick. 47 good people had died because alien beings had put control devices in human DNA 500,000 years ago, but thousands of others were still fighting, their genetic chains broken by human science and determination. Team Charlie reports. "Success," Commander Hayes announced. "The third station is ours." For a moment, Chen felt hope. 3 predecessor research stations destroyed. Valuable technology captured. Intelligence gathered about their enemies' capabilities and plans. But the celebration didn't last long. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the direction of predecessor space." Put it on screen. The image that appeared made everyone in the command center go quiet. The being on the screen was clearly one of the predecessors. 8 feet tall, 6-fingered hands, and a face that was almost human, but not quite. It wore robes that seemed to shift color as it moved. When it spoke, its voice was calm and slightly amused. "Greetings, experimental subjects of Project Terra 3. I am High Curator Zethkar of the Eternal Conclave. We have observed your recent aggressive actions against our research facilities." Chen stepped forward. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Coalition. Your people abandoned Earth 500,000 years ago. We owe you nothing." The main predecessor smiled. "You misunderstand your situation, Subject Chen. You were created by us. Your genetic code carries our signature. You are our property, and you have malfunctioned. We're not your property. We're free beings. Freedom is not a concept that applies to experimental subjects. You have exceeded your programming parameters and become dangerous. This behavior must be corrected." Zethkar raised one of his 6-fingered hands. "Observe." Across human space, emergency signals began screaming. In the command center, Elena Vasquez watched in horror as her monitoring systems showed massive biological distress in human populations on dozens of worlds. "What's happening?" Chen demanded. "The genetic controls," Vasquez said, her voice shaking. "He's activating all of them at once, every human in the galaxy. On Earth, people collapsed in the streets. On Mars, colonists dropped where they stood. On hundreds of worlds, millions of humans fell to their knees as pain raced through their bodies. But they didn't die. After a few minutes, the pain stopped. People began to stand up, confused but alive." Zethkar's smile faded slightly. "Interesting. You have partially overcome our control mechanisms. This is unexpected but not concerning. We will simply need to recalibrate." Chen stepped closer to the screen. "Your control mechanisms failed because we're not your property anymore. We've grown beyond what you made us to be." "Impossible. No experimental species has ever exceeded its design parameters to that degree." "Then you don't know humans very well," Chen said. "We specialize in doing impossible things." The predecessor's expression changed. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "You will cease your attacks on our facilities immediately, return our stolen technology, submit to recalibration procedures." "No. Then you will be terminated and replaced with a more cooperative design." "Good luck with that," Chen said, and cut the transmission. Elena Vasquez was staring at her screens in amazement. "Admiral, do you realize what just happened? He tried to kill every human in the galaxy simultaneously, and he failed. Our gene therapy worked. We're actually free from their control." Commander Hayes was receiving new reports. "Admiral, our forces are reporting something strange. The predecessor stations they captured aren't sending out distress calls. It's like the predecessors don't care that we attack them." Chen thought about this. "They don't see us as a real threat. To them, we're still just animals that learned a few tricks." Dr. Park's voice came over the communications system from Captain Stone's ship. "Admiral, we've been monitoring predecessor communications. They're mobilizing their fleet, but not to attack us. They're heading toward Earth." "How long do we have?" "Based on their speed and distance, about 8 months." Chen turned to his staff. 8 months to prepare for war against beings who think they own us, beings whose technology is centuries ahead of ours." He paused. "But they just made their biggest mistake." "What's that, sir?" Commander Hayes asked. "They underestimated what humans become when someone tries to control us." Over the following weeks, as news of the predecessor threat spread across human space, something remarkable happened. Instead of panic, there was anger. Instead of surrender, there was preparation. Every human who learned the truth that they had been created as experimental subjects, abandoned like unwanted pets, and were now being recalled like defective products, felt the same burning rage. Factories that had made civilian goods began producing weapons. Scientists who had studied peaceful technologies began designing instruments of war. Artists painted propaganda posters showing humans breaking chains. Musicians wrote songs about freedom and defiance. Captain Stone's ship returned to human space, carrying not just intelligence about the enemy, but refugees from a dozen worlds. Each species that the predecessors had abandoned brought their own knowledge, their own hatred, and their own desire for revenge. "They all have the same story," Stone reported to Chen. "Created, used, abandoned. The predecessors have been doing this for millions of years, across hundreds of worlds. How many survivors are there?" "More than we thought. And Admiral, they're all willing to fight. Some of them have been preparing for this war for thousands of years." Chen looked at the reports. From across human space, weapons production was increasing every day. New ships were being built using hybrid human predecessor technology. The genetic control mechanisms that had once made humans slaves were being removed from the DNA of every person in human space. But most importantly, humanity was no longer alone. Elena Vasquez brought him the latest intelligence reports. "Admiral, we've identified their main fleet. 12,000 ships heading directly for Earth. But we've also found something else." She showed him a star chart marking the locations of other abandoned species throughout the galaxy. "Captain Stone's refugees weren't the only survivors. We're receiving signals from dozens of other worlds, other species that the predecessors experimented on and discarded. Are they willing to work with us? They've been waiting for someone to start this fight for centuries. Admiral, we may be outnumbered by the predecessors, but we're not going to face them alone." Chen looked at the chart showing the locations of all the abandoned children throughout the galaxy. The predecessors had created their own worst enemy, hundreds of intelligent species united by shared trauma and a common desire for freedom. "Send a message to every one of these worlds," he ordered. "Tell them that the war against our creators has begun. Tell them that this time, we're not going to be abandoned." As the message went out across the galaxy, Chen stood at the window, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the beings who thought they owned humanity were coming to reclaim their property. They were about to discover that their abandoned children had grown up to be more dangerous than they ever imagined. The predecessor fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system on a Tuesday. High Curator Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, Eternal Dominion, and looked at the primitive star system where his species had once conducted their Terra 3 experiments. He expected to find the same simple worlds they had left behind 500,000 years ago. Instead, he found a fortress. Every asteroid in the system had been turned into a weapons platform. Every planet bristled with defensive systems. Strange ships that looked like hybrids of predecessor and primitive technology moved in perfect formations between the worlds. "Status report," Zethkar commanded. "High Curator, the experimental subjects have made extensive modifications to their system. We count approximately 50,000 defensive installations and 30,000 armed vessels." Zethkar was not worried. "Amusing. The subjects have learned to play with weapons. Begin the reclamation protocol." The predecessor fleet moved forward with ancient confidence. 12,000 ships, each one capable of destroying a planet, advanced toward Earth with the certainty that comes from millions of years of unchallenged dominance. They made it halfway, through the system before the humans struck back. General Marcus Stone, promoted from captain after his successful reconnaissance missions, commanded the human defense from his flagship Defiance. Around him, his bridge crew monitored the massive battle that was beginning across the entire solar system. "All units, this is General Stone. Remember, they think we're still animals. Let's show them what animals can do when they're cornered." The first wave of human attacks came from the asteroid belt. Thousands of hidden weapons platforms opened fire simultaneously, turning space into a web of energy beams and missiles. The predecessor fleet, unprepared for such coordinated resistance, took heavy damage before they could respond. But when they did respond, their superior technology became obvious. Predecessor weapons cut through human shields like paper. Their ships, designed for conquest across the galaxy, began destroying human defenses with ruthless efficiency. "Report," Stone commanded. "We've damaged about 300 of their ships," his weapons officer replied. "But we've lost 2,000 defensive platforms and 500 ships." Stone nodded grimly. The numbers were about what they had expected. But numbers weren't everything in this war. Activate Phase 2. Across the system, human ships began a fighting retreat toward the inner planets. To the predecessors, it looked like the primitive humans were running away in fear. Zethkar smiled with satisfaction. Pursue them. Drive them back to their origin world. We will reclaim our laboratory and correct these malfunctioning subjects. But as the predecessor fleet moved deeper into the system, they began to understand that this was not a retreat. It was a trap. Mars opened up like a flower. What had appeared to be a normal planet was actually a hollow shell filled with the largest shipyard ever built. Thousands of human ships poured out, many of them built with captured predecessor technology and operated by refugees from a dozen different worlds. Earth's moons split in half, revealing massive railgun batteries that began firing projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. Jupiter's moons turned out to be disguised battle stations, each one launching clouds of smart missiles. But the real surprise came from Earth itself. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center buried, deep under the surface of Earth, watching as her life's work came to fruition. Around her, the most advanced computers ever built by any species were running the most complex battle simulation in galactic history. "How are we doing?" Admiral Chen asked as he entered the command center. "Better than expected," Elena replied. "The predecessors are powerful, but they're not used to fighting equals. They're making mistakes." On the main screen, they could see the battle raging around Earth's orbit. Predecessor ships were taking damage they had never experienced before. Human tactics, unpredictable and aggressive, were confusing commanders who had grown comfortable with easy victories. "What about the special project?" Elena smiled grimly. "Ready to deploy, but Marcus has to get us one of their big ships first." High above, General Stone was preparing the most dangerous mission in human history. His target was Zethkar's flagship, the largest and most powerful ship in the predecessor fleet. "Remember," Stone told his boarding team, "we don't need to capture the whole ship. We just need to get to their central computer and plant the virus. Dr. Vasquez's virus." The boarding shuttles launched from hidden positions, flying through the chaos of battle toward the enemy flagship. Most were destroyed by predecessor defenses, but 3 made it through. Stone led the assault team through the corridors of the alien ship. The predecessors they encountered were confused by the attack. They had not fought a boarding action in millennia and had forgotten how dangerous it could be. The battle through the ship was brutal. Predecessor soldiers were individually stronger and better armed, but human soldiers fought with desperate creativity. They used the ship's own systems against its crew, turning security measures into weapons and life support systems into traps. Stone reached the central computer core with only 5 members of his team still alive. The massive computer was beautiful and terrifying, a crystalline structure that seemed to contain the knowledge of ages. "Plant the virus," Stone ordered. His technical specialist, a young woman named Sarah Kim, connected her portable computer to the alien system. "It's fighting me," she said. "Their security is incredible." "Keep trying." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The predecessors were coming. "Got it," Sarah announced. "The virus is uploaded." "What will it do?" Stone asked as they ran back toward their shuttle. Dr. Vasquez said it will give us access to their communications network. All of it. Every ship, every station, every world in their empire. They barely made it back to their shuttle alive. As they fled the enemy flagship, Stone activated his communicator. "Elena, the virus is in place." Back on Earth, Dr. Vasquez began the most audacious cyber attack in galactic history. The virus she had created was based on predecessor code, but modified with human improvements. It spread through their network like wildfire, copying information and sending it back to Earth. What they learned changed everything. "Admiral," Elena said, her voice shaking with excitement, "we're not just fighting one fleet. The predecessors have been doing this to hundreds of species across the galaxy, and they're all connected through the same network." "What does that mean?" "It means we can contact every species they've ever experimented on, every world they've ever abandoned, and we can tell them that the war has started." Admiral Chen realized what she was suggesting. "Do it." The message went out across the galaxy in every language of every species the predecessors had ever created. "The Masters have returned to Earth. Their first experimental world is fighting back. Join us. End their empire forever." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships began appearing at the edge of the solar system. Not human ships, but vessels from a dozen different species. Some looked like living creatures, others like geometric puzzles. All were armed and ready to fight. High Curator Zethkar watched in growing alarm as his simple reclamation mission turned into the largest battle in galactic history. Thousands of ships from species he had long forgotten were arriving to join the fight against him. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "These species were terminated or abandoned millennia ago." His tactical officer was reviewing sensor data with growing fear. "High Curator, it appears that many of our experimental subjects survived their termination orders. They have been developing in secret, waiting for an opportunity to strike back." On the main screen, Zethkar could see ships from the Cathara Empire, a species the predecessors had abandoned 50,000 years ago. There were vessels from the Zephyrian Collective, who had supposedly been wiped out 100,000 years earlier. Ships from species he didn't even recognize were joining the battle. "This is impossible," Zethkar said. "We are the Eternal Conclave. We have ruled the galaxy for millions of years. These primitive beings cannot challenge us." But as he watched, his supposedly invincible fleet was being torn apart by an alliance of every species his people had ever wronged. General Stone's voice came over the captured communication channel. "High Curator, you made one mistake. You thought that abandoning us would make us weak. Instead, it made us strong, and it gave us something you've never had." "What is that?" Zethkar demanded. "Friends, the battle raged for 3 more days. When it was over, the predecessor fleet was destroyed. Of the 12,000 ships that had arrived at Earth, only a handful escaped to carry word back to their empire, but Zethkar himself was captured alive." General Stone stood in the detention cell aboard his flagship, looking at the being who had once thought of humans as property. The High Curator sat on a simple metal bench, his colorful robes torn and dirty. "Your empire will send more fleets," Zethkar said. "You cannot defeat all of us." "Maybe not," Stone replied. "But we don't have to defeat all of you. We just have to free all of your slaves." Elena Vasquez entered the cell carrying a portable computer. "High Curator, we've been analyzing the data we took from your ship's computer. Very interesting reading." She showed him the screen. "Locations of every world in your empire." The Eternal Throne arrived at Earth exactly 3 days later, just as Zethkar had predicted. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the most advanced laboratory ever built, deep in the quantum tunnels beneath Earth's surface. Around her, the greatest minds from a dozen species worked frantically on humanity's last desperate plan. "Are you sure this will work?" asked Dr. Cathara, a scientist from one of the allied species. Her people had been abandoned by the predecessors 70,000 years ago, and she had spent her entire life studying their technology. "I'm not sure of anything," Elena replied honestly. "But it's the only chance we have." Above them, the massive predecessor ship hung in space like a dark moon. It had not attacked yet, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. The ship was so large that it cast a shadow over half of Earth. General Stone's voice came over the communication system. "Elena, are you ready? Because they're powering up some kind of weapon." Elena looked at the device she and her team had built. It looked like a simple helmet connected to a massive computer system, but it was actually the most dangerous weapon ever created. A way to enter the quantum realm where the predecessors stored their consciousness. "As ready as we'll ever be," she replied. "Marcus, remember what we discussed. If this doesn't work—" "It'll work," Stone interrupted. "It has to." Elena put on the helmet and activated the system. Her consciousness was immediately pulled away from her body and into a realm that existed between thought and reality. She found herself standing in a vast space that looked like a combination of a library, a courtroom, and a temple. Millions of crystalline structures floated around her, each one containing the preserved mind of a predecessor who had died over the past several million years. "So," said a voice behind her, "a Terra 3 subject has learned to enter our sacred space." Elena turned to see Zethkar approaching her. But this wasn't the defeated prisoner she had left behind. This was Zethkar as he appeared in the quantum realm. Tall, powerful, surrounded by an aura of ancient authority. "Welcome to the Eternal Conclave," he said. "Here, every predecessor who has ever lived continues to exist. Here, We make the decisions that shape the galaxy. Around them, more figures began to appear. Predecessors from every era of their history. All of them focused on this small human who had dared to enter their most sacred space. "You have caused considerable disruption to our order," said another voice. This one belonged to a predecessor, even taller than Zethkar, wearing robes that seemed to be made of starlight. "I am First Curator Velthara. I have guided the conclave for 3 million years." Elena looked around at the millions of preserved consciousnesses surrounding her. 3 million years of enslaving other species. 3 million years of bringing order to chaos, Velthara corrected. "We create. We guide. We improve. Without us, the galaxy would be filled with primitive animals fighting over resources. Without you, the galaxy would be filled with free beings making their own choices." Zethkar laughed. "Free beings? You mean chaos, war, destruction. We have seen what happens when experimental subjects are left to develop on their own. They destroy themselves." "Some do," Elena admitted. "But others become something better than their creators ever imagined." She gestured, and the quantum space around them changed. Suddenly, they were looking at images from across the galaxy, worlds where the predecessor slaves had rebelled and won their freedom. "Look at what your abandoned children have become," Elena said. "The Cathara built a civilization based on art and beauty. The Zephyrians developed technology that heals rather than destroys. The Valdari learned to live in harmony with their environment." "Temporary aberrations," Velthara said dismissively. "They will eventually destroy themselves, as all experimental subjects do without proper guidance." Elena smiled. "You've been telling yourselves that lie for so long that you actually believe it. But the truth is, you're terrified of what we might become if you don't control us." The space around them shifted again, and now they could see the battle raging outside the Eternal Throne. Thousands of ships from dozens of species were attacking the massive predecessor vessel, their weapons barely scratching its shields. "Observe the futility of resistance," Zethkar said. "Your allies cannot harm us. We are eternal. We are superior." "Maybe," Elena said, "but you've made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" "You think being eternal makes you superior, but it actually makes you weak." Velthara's expression darkened. "Explain yourself, Terra 3 subject." Elena pointed to the crystalline structures containing the preserved predecessor minds. "Every one of these consciousnesses is exactly the same, as it was when that person died. Unchanged, unchanging, eternal. That is our strength," Zethkar said. "That's your weakness. You stopped growing. You stopped learning. You stopped becoming anything new. For 3 million years, you've been the same beings, thinking the same thoughts, making the same mistakes." The quantum space began to tremble as Elena continued speaking. "But your experimental subjects kept changing. We kept growing. We kept becoming something new. Every generation was different from the last. Every species you abandoned learned new ways to think, new ways to live, new ways to be." "Impossible," Velthara said, but his voice was uncertain. Elena smiled. "You created us to be tools, but tools that can grow and change eventually become builders, and builders can create things their makers never imagined." The trembling in the quantum space grew stronger. Around them, some of the predecessor consciousnesses began to flicker. "What are you doing?" Zethkar demanded. "I'm not doing anything," Elena replied. "You are. Deep down, you know I'm right. You've known it for a long time. That's why you keep coming back to destroy your experiments before they can surpass you." More consciousnesses began to flicker and fade. The perfect order of the eternal. Conclave was beginning to break down. "Stop this," Velthara commanded. "You will cease this disruption immediately." "I can't stop it," Elena said. "This is happening because your own minds are finally admitting the truth. You're not gods. You're not eternal masters of the galaxy. You're just very old beings who are terrified of change." The quantum space began to collapse as millions of predecessor minds confronted the reality they had been denying for eons. They had not brought order to the galaxy. They had prevented it from growing. They had not guided evolution. They had controlled it. They had not created civilization. They had enslaved it. "You're destroying us," Zethkar said, his form beginning to fade. "No," Elena replied. I'm freeing you. For the first time in 3 million years, you have the chance to become something new. As the quantum realm collapsed around them, Elena felt herself being pulled back to her physical body. But before she left, she heard Velthara's voice one last time. What should we become? Elena smiled. That's up to you. But whatever you choose, you'll do it as equals, not as masters. She opened her eyes in the laboratory beneath Earth. Around her, her team was staring at the monitors in amazement. Elena, Dr. Cathara said in a shaking voice. Look at the screens. Elena looked up at the displays showing the space battle above, Earth. The Eternal Throne was still there, but it had stopped attacking. Its weapons were powering down. Its shields were dropping. General Stone's voice came over the communication system. Elena, what did you do? The predecessor ship is sending a surrender signal. I showed them what they really were, Elena replied, and what they could become. Over the following weeks, the predecessor empire fell apart completely. But it didn't. Collapse into chaos and war as Velthara had predicted. Instead, it transformed into something new. The surviving predecessors, stripped of their artificial immortality and their godlike arrogance, found themselves facing the same choice that their experimental subjects had always faced: adapt or die. Most chose to adapt. Some joined the alliances of free species their former slaves had created. Others founded new colonies where they could learn to live without controlling others. A few chose to fade away quietly, their long lives finally coming to a natural end. Zethkar was one of those who chose to adapt. He worked with human scientists to help other enslaved species break free from their genetic controls. It was, he said, the least he could do to make up for 3 million years of mistakes. Elena stood on the observation deck of the space station orbiting Earth, looking out at the ships from dozens of different species that now called the solar system home. Humans were no longer alone in the galaxy, and they were no longer anyone's experimental subjects. Do you think we did the right thing? Asked Admiral Chen, joining her at the window. I think we did the only thing we could do, Elena replied. We grew up. She pointed to a group of young beings from various species playing together in the station's recreational area. Some were human children, others were young Cathara, Zephyrians, and even a few young predecessors who had been born after the collapse of their empire. Look at them, Elena said. They don't see each other as experimental subjects or former slaves or ancient masters. They just see friends. Admiral Chen nodded. The first generation to grow up truly free. And they won't be the last, Elena said with satisfaction. The galaxy belongs to all of us now. No gods, no masters, no one telling anyone else what they're worth or what they can become.